You've seen tons of tools all over YouTube claiming that they are the best solution for all of your problems. But today, I'm here to unveil the sneaky truth behind one of the most popular items in woodworking, how you've been brainwashed without even knowing it, unveil multiple products I regret buying, and how truly the best solution to all of your problems has been directly in front of your eyes this whole time. And it's incredibly cheap. But first, I need to make a confession and talk about something I should have told you a long time ago. I think it's finally time to admit that I made a massive mistake. I built this workbench outfeed table about a year and a half ago thinking it was going to solve all of my problems. My first workbench was made out of some scrap plywood and I really had no way to clamp anything down. So when I made my second workbench, I added some T-track to the top because everybody on YouTube loves T-track. But in reality, T-track sucks. The T-track worked great for a couple weeks, and then glue and other stuff got stuck into it, rendering that T-track effectively useless.
Not to mention, when you try to clamp things down to T-track, it's only held down by a few screws so it pulls itself up out of the bench, again, rendering it useless for what it was designed to do.
So then I built this workbench to try to solve those problems. To prevent anything like glue sticking to the workbench and ruining that flat surface, I found this laminate coated MDF. And while this did work well in the beginning, this stuff is such a thin coating that eventually just starts flaking off, and now everything sticks to this workbench. And as far as work holding goes, I did make the edges of this workbench extend over the sides so that I can easily clamp stuff onto the workbench itself. But being stuck only able to clamp things to the side of the workbench isn't really the best solution. So that's when I bought one of these automatically adjustable workbench clamps, but this still didn't solve my problems.
Why? Because it's even more expensive than T-track at $70, and I can only clamp things down in one specific spot. Again, not a good solution.
So today, let's address all those mistakes that I made and come up with a solution that makes the perfect workbench top. Now, just a few days ago, I started experimenting with these dog holes. These holes allow you to use tons of accessories like these clamps to instantly hold things down to the workbench anywhere. So let's get started.
The workbench is one of the most ubiquitous items in the woodshop. Every single person has a completely different setup, from the most basic piece of OSB plywood on some cheap sawhorses to fully custom workbenches made from several $1,000s of hardwood with more dovetail joints than you can count. But here's the problem. On one hand, these temporary slapped together work surfaces do get the job done in the moment, they take seconds to construct, and allow you to get to work immediately, but leave a lot to be desired. You can't really clamp things down, they aren't flat, and stuff like glue and epoxy will stick to them, making them even more useless over time. But on the other hand, spending hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars on a custom workbench with all the bells and whistles, in my opinion, is a complete waste of time. I want my shop to be functional, but still be utilized as a tool. If I spend months building the perfect workbench, I'm more than likely afraid to actually use it for what it's intended to be used for: work. So, my goal is to make a highly functional, highly useful, and highly cost-effective workbench that will stand the test of time. And if I end up hating it and it doesn't work out for me, I'm not out a ton of money or time. Throughout this build, I want to show you multiple ways to get things done regardless of the tools that you have. Sure, a track saw, as you saw, makes the process of breaking down large sheets super easy, but that comes at a steep price. I recognize not everyone has one, so check this out. You can do the exact same thing by clamping down a large straight edge, like this piece of wood, and running a circular saw along the edge. That will give you a perfectly straight cut, just like the track saw, but the obvious downside is the added setup time, and as you can see, it's incredibly messy, but still a perfectly straight cut. The first incredibly important thing for a workbench is that it's actually flat. Sure, I could use solid hardwood, but that would require me to mill all those boards perfectly flat and make sure that they never warp over time. Not to mention the enormous amount of time, effort, energy, and money that goes into that. Instead, I just picked up some cheap sheets of MDF. MDF, or medium density fiberboard, is basically just crushed up wood and sawdust mixed up with a resin or glue that's pressed into sheets. This results in a product that is super dense, hard, and super flat. Only problem is that one of these 4x8 sheets weighs over 100 pounds, so moving it is a little bit of a nightmare. But that weight will be super handy functioning as a workbench, as it makes everything way more stable. What you see me doing here is laminating 2 sheets of MDF together to create an even thicker, even heavier, and even flatter workbench that will turn out to be about 1.5 inches or about 38 millimeters thick. A vacuum press would be ideal to compress these 2 sheets together, but laying on top tons of toolboxes and lining the edge with clamps will get the job done just fine. During this glue up, I really wasn't super concerned with getting everything to line up perfectly. You're probably thinking, that's crazy. You want those edges to be perfect. Well, I know my limitations as a woodworker. I am far from perfect. I am not a machine, so I develop hacks to achieve perfection that just involve a little forethought. So instead of cutting all those pieces to the exact size I want for the workbench top, I cut them oversized, laminate them together, and then I can come back with my track saw to cut the slab to its final size, leaving me with perfectly aligned edges. I achieve a perfect result, which is what I'm after. Only downside is that I waste a little bit of money on materials. Speaking of wasting money, one of the tools that you will see me use throughout this project that I regret buying is that red Woodpecker's track square. It's incredibly expensive, incredibly heavy, slips out of calibration frequently. Since then, I've picked up this track square from TSO that works way better at a fraction of the price. I'll leave a link to that and all the other tools I'm using in this video down in the description. One of the downsides of using MDF is that while the faces are pretty tough, hard, and durable, the edges are a different story. Hit them with a hammer and they will instantly deform and mushroom, which is less than ideal for a workbench. To combat that, I'm going to be surrounding the entire workbench with some hard maple. Believe it or not, hard maple is really hard, which will help protect the edge of my workbench from bumps, but also let me do something else that you won't see coming, but more on that later. I need to get this rough sawn lumber perfectly flat, and I don't own a jointer, so I use this sled method that I've talked about in virtually all my videos. However, I recently stopped doing this whole process and upgraded to something different. That's one of the many behind the scenes videos that I post all the time over on my Patreon page. Not only do patrons help support the channel, they get access to all my behind the scenes videos, including things like tool reviews, unboxing videos, in addition to weekly and sometimes daily updates, discounts on plans, free merchandise, and tons more. My patrons already know about the upgrade I made, so I no longer have to use that insanely time-consuming sled milling process, and they gotta view this video in its entirety way before anyone else. There's a link down in the description where you can join the community and help me get one step closer to being able to quit my day job and take this channel full-time, but as always, there is no pressure. Another tool that YouTubers tell you that you need to spend tons of money on is expensive clamps. I need to clamp the hardwood onto the end of this workbench, but I don't have any clamps that large. I could absolutely purchase some larger ones for about $70 a piece, or I can just daisy chain together the clamps I already own. I am all for saving money when things aren't entirely necessary. Sure, owning super long clamps would be nice in a rare occasion that I need them, but there are always workarounds like this to help you out in a pinch. Just get creative. Another creative solution, toss on some masking tape on the ends of the boards to help hold them in place while you get things situated. It's like having more sets of hands. I intentionally left the edging proud of the surface because, again, I am not perfect. Just like laminating the MDF panels earlier, I would rather make things too big and then come back to refine them down. Now, hand tools are something that until just recently, I pretty much refused to use. I never saw the purpose of them until I tested one out at a friend's shop. I can quickly and easily take off a super small shaving until things are perfectly flush, making the maple look like it was originally part of the MDF. And for the ends, grab the track saw once again and let it do its magic. I attached some more strips of maple to the long edges of the bench using the exact same method I just showed. The hand plane creates those super satisfying curls, but let's not gloss over the fact that the hand plane is also super expensive to purchase and can be an absolute nightmare to set up and sharpen correctly. You could absolutely use a flush trim bit on the router to get things situated here, or just bring out a sander to flush things up. Only thing you need to be cautious of is not tilting the sander, causing you to accidentally round the edges over, but that's not too hard to do. All that's left to do now is trim off the excess and this workbench top is done. Well, not so fast.
So now that the main panel of the workbench is all built and constructed, we need to turn our attention to protecting this thing.
My buddy Ronnie has a great-grandmother that always told me the importance of protection, so I'm going to listen to her like any sensible person would. And for that protection, I'm going to use a thick black laminate. Some people refer to this stuff as Formica, which is the same thing that's plagued crappy apartment countertops like the ones I've had for years. It's basically just a thick plastic sheet that is super durable and virtually nothing sticks to it. Wood glue, finish, even epoxy will all pop off, ensuring that my work surface is always clean. Only problem is that it comes in these massive rolls which are super flimsy and can be kinda difficult to cut down to size. But I got it situated. The other problem with using laminate, it requires you to use contact adhesive, which smells absolutely terrible and probably kills more brain cells than watching stupid videos on TikTok, so wearing a respirator is essential. And so is making sure that you're using the correct filter, which are the organic vapor filters, not the dust filters. Those won't do a thing against this stuff. This is my first time ever using contact adhesive, and it was incredibly easy. But this process is kind of strange. You paint it on both surfaces pretty liberally, allow it to completely dry, which takes about 5 to 10 minutes. Then you press the pieces together for an instant and permanent bond. And to really make sure the pieces are stuck together well, I use this special laminate roller to apply tons of pressure to the surface. Again, I made the pieces of laminate intentionally large, so I popped a flush trim bit into my router to cut it perfectly to size. Now be careful here. The cheap flush trim bits that have those straight cutters have a super high tendency to rip, split, and tear out laminate. That's why I'm using a special spiral type flush trim bit here that gives me an absolutely flawless cut. If you want to pick up one for yourself, there's a coupon code down in the description, and I promise you will never go back to using those straight bits again. One of those other things I will never go back to, like I mentioned earlier, is T-Track. Have you ever noticed that you see tons of videos about people making workbenches with boatloads of T-Track in them? I'm talking like hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars worth of T-Track. But you never actually see them use the T-Track on that same workbench in a future video? Well, as my channel has grown, I've become more aware of a lot of the marketing efforts that go on behind the scenes. T-Track is simply extruded aluminum, which is incredibly cheap to produce. But T-Track is expensive to buy. That is the perfect product for a company to push. And no, you aren't crazy. The reason that you don't see blue T-Track built into every single workbench here in 2024 is because that company pulled out all of their YouTube marketing dollars. I'm a man of the people, and you deserve to know the truth. They make huge margins on this stuff, but I have a dramatically cheaper, dramatically stronger, and dramatically more useful hold-down solution, but we're not there quite yet. To wrap up the laminate process, I need to apply a large sheet to the top of the workbench. The other method of cutting this stuff involves using a straight edge and a special scoring knife to score the cut. Then you fold the laminate back on itself and snap directly on the line. It does work, but I still think a saw is a much better, much easier solution. I'm paying extra attention here to vacuum up any pieces of sawdust or other debris before laying down the top sheet on the workbench because any and all pieces between the laminate and the MDF will show through the top and leave bumps, which I definitely want to avoid. If you're looking for all the details, measurements, and step-by-step process to get you through this project or any of the other projects I've built on my channel, check out the plans link down in the description below. And yes, because I know a huge portion of people live outside the US where we still rely on an antiquated measurement system. The plans are also available in metric for you too. I should mention that MDF is very porous, so it soaks up a lot of this contact adhesive. So I recommend laying down several coats just to make sure you get a super strong bond. And because the adhesive does set immediately, I laid down some clamps to create a barrier between the MDF and the laminate and slowly worked my way across the entire surface, making sure to use that laminate roller to get nice, even pressure everywhere. Now here's a bonus tip. Be careful when applying pressure around the edges with that roller, as you can easily crack the overhanging laminate, which would be a huge bummer this far in the project. Real quick, I need your help. If there's anyone out there watching that happens to work at Facebook or Meta, or knows somebody that works there and is willing to help me out with an account issue that I've been trying to reach someone for over 2 years to help solve, I would greatly appreciate it if you could email me at eric@spencleydesignco.com. Thanks. That would be a monumental step in getting me one step closer to being able to quit my day job and take this channel full time. Again, I use that special spiral flush trim bit to cut the laminate pieces perfectly to size, but a close eye will notice all that nasty junk underneath. That's excess adhesive, but I can quickly take care of it with a little bit of mineral spirits and some elbow grease. Just make sure that you wait about 24 hours for the adhesive to fully cure on the surfaces before removing this excess. Now, it's perfectly clean.
Now, one of the big issues about putting laminate on a surface like this is that these edges are razor sharp.
No problem though. I can throw a super small round over bit into my router and ease over all of the edges so nothing is sharp. Bonus tip, run the router in the opposite direction, doing a climb cut, and you'll actually get an even smoother finish on laminate edges. This new workbench is a huge change in my workshop, and another huge change is that I just got married a few days ago and I couldn't be happier. When going through big life changes, things like making healthy eating choices can take a back seat. But that's where Factor comes in. You can crush your wellness goals this May with dietitian approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. Plus, you can keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes, which means no shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up.
Now, I absolutely could take more laminate, put it on the bottom, but I don't have enough left.
To help save me another trip to the store, I came up with a quick solution of applying some polyurethane to the bottom of the workbench to prevent moisture absorption. And my solution for not making another trip to the grocery store for food is getting my fresh, never frozen meals sent directly to my door with Factor. I've actually been a Factor customer long before they reached out wanting to sponsor a video, and I love how flexible it is. I can easily adjust my order size, enjoy meals with loved ones, or even skip a week when I have a special event like my honeymoon coming next week. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code SDC50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code SDC50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders.
So now that I've got my wood wrapped up and protected, I can focus on putting in those clamping spots. Now, if you remember from before, I tested out these dog holes and ended up really liking them. So that's what I want to put all over the surface of this workbench top. And while yes, you can absolutely just grab your drill and measure, mark out, drill all these holes out, but I have a much faster and a way more accurate way to do it.
This is a jig that I bought with my own money from woodpeckers. And I know what you're saying. Oh, great. I'm not going to buy a woodpecker's tool. They're too expensive. Most YouTubers would justify the cost, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Don't buy this. I was so mad that I wasted my money on this, but we'll get to that in a little bit. What I'm doing here is putting in a bushing set on my router and tossing in a massive 1/2-inch spiral bit. The bushing will sit inside the holes in the template, allowing me to plunge all the way through the workbench top and leave perfect dog hole cutouts. In theory. This is a boatload of material to remove all at once, so I'm taking multiple passes, slowly plunging down to the full depth. Also, I cannot recommend enough getting an attachment for your router that allows you to extract all of the dust from the cut. I'll show you in a bit what happens without it, but it is truly a game changer and well worth the money for any router that you own. So after all the holes are bored, I can insert these registration pegs to make sure the template doesn't move and get access to the rest of the holes. That whole corner is now taken care of, so I can work my way down the edge of the workbench. Tasks like this are very tedious, time-consuming, boring, and repetitive. Inherently, these are the exact kinds of tasks that can lead to carelessness, which often leads to injuries, so be really careful doing stuff like this. I highly recommend picking up a pair of Bluetooth hearing protection, which prevents you from having to hear this for hours on end, and instead you can enjoy music, audiobooks, or my podcast, Off the Cut, that I do every single week talking about everything woodworking, making, tools, and all of the behind-the-scenes stuff that I'm up to. There's a link for that in the description below. Also, if you are interested in a pair of Bluetooth hearing protection like the ones I'm wearing, there's a coupon code for those down below as well.
And if you are going to do this, here's why you want to get a router that has dust collection built in.
The first thing that you'll notice is there's a massive pile of dust that's created. That's messy, but it also jams up the router bit and prevents the guide bushing from seating all the way against the template properly, which means that the hole being bored out doesn't actually go all the way to the edges. The second thing you might notice is that there's a little bit of smoke coming up from around the bit. All of the extra sawdust is causing excess friction, which is building up heat. Not only does this give you a poor cut and burn the wood, it dramatically shortens the life of your router bits, which can be very expensive. So truly, it is worth the extra money to buy some sort of router dust extraction attachment. Once you have it, you will never regret it, unlike this jig. Let's talk about that.
So now that I've got all the dog holes cut on the side of the bench, I need to start working in more towards the middle. And this is one of the really common complaints about this system. It seems like you should just be able to put these in here and then start going. But when you put these little pins in a straight line, this has the ability to slide back and forth. Now this small amount of movement might not seem like a big deal, but if you're somebody who's going to use these dog holes for alignment, that's not going to work. So instead of lining the pins up in a straight line, what you actually want to do is set everything up so that it's in more of a triangular attachment. That will ensure that this thing does not move at all when you go to do the other holes.
At a whopping $220 for this jig from a company that claims accuracy is the cornerstone of what they do, this jig is wildly disappointing. Yes, in that clip, you saw me triangulate the pins to hold the jig down, and it worked great. Right there. But to be 100% transparent, as I kept going, the small amount of slop in this jig repeatedly compounded itself, leading the holes to get sloppier and sloppier as I went. If you look closely, you can even see a hammer on the bench that I used to pound the pins in, and pliers that I had to use to pull those pins out, which led to the pins getting absolutely destroyed by the time I was done. I wasn't going to mention this, but I want to be totally honest about all of my experiences with the tools I'm using. For $220 of my own money, this jig was a major disappointment, and I cannot recommend that anybody spend money on this. Since then, I scoured the internet and found a significantly better solution, so I picked one up, tested it out. While it is $20 more than the junk woodpecker sells, I can attest to it being orders of magnitude easier to use, more accurate, and it only requires you to own a drill, not an expensive router with dust collection. Seems like a win in my book. So I'll leave a link to that parf system down in the description below.
Thank God that is over.
Well, not so fast. Because I'm someone that likes to have my outfeed table at the same level as my table saw, I need to cut in some recesses that allow me to use my miter gauge without any interference. So while I do have the router out, I'm just going to cut a couple grooves in here.
One thing to be cautious of at this point is that this workbench top is extremely heavy. I would easily estimate it to be around 150 pounds, which is like 70 kilograms for people who use a sensible system of measurement, and was a huge challenge for my feeble body to move around. But getting it out of the way and temporarily stored on some sawhorses allows me to unscrew my old workbench top from the frame. Speaking of the frame, this is not sponsored in any way, but I absolutely love this frame. It is a solid metal frame from Craig that bolts together, has adjustable height legs, and has casters that allow me to move it around when needed and lock it in when it's where I want it to be. Plus, the metal is way more durable than wood and saves a ton of time from having to build my own base. With the new top in place, I can mark out oversized rectangles for my miter slots of my table saw to extend into. Now, it is tempting to want to make these absolutely perfect and the same size as what's on your table saw, but I don't want to run the risk of having any interference or the bench not being exactly parallel to the slots, so I slightly enlarge them. Because I know you're going to ask, there's a link for this magic pencil with white lead that can write on any surface down in the description too. With a few pieces of scrap wood and some double-sided tape, I whipped up this jig to route out the recess. I should let you know that if you ever need any router bits, I've got a coupon code below that will get you 10% off all my favorite bits and a bunch of other coupons too. Anyway, this worked flawlessly on the first one, but after routing the second recess, as you can see, I destroyed my jig when trying to remove it. No worries though, I'm all done here, so no harm done. Now you will notice that I have bare wood exposed, but I've got a plan for that. I picked up some of this new UV cure resin, which is pretty slick. I mix in a little bit of black pigment, and then coated the recess with a thin layer. Now here comes the cool part. I can use this UV light to instantly cure the epoxy, which gives me rock solid, hard epoxy finish in just a few seconds. Now this will not work for something that's like 5 inches deep by any means, but for small repairs or things like this sure beats having to wait a full day for typical epoxy to cure. Innovative products like this is something that I really enjoy learning about and finding out. I never want to be the person that is stuck in their ways and refuses to try something new. Even if I find a product, tool, or technique that I love and it works great for me, I owe it to all of you viewers and myself to try something new occasionally. That's why you will see me experiment with new techniques, experiment with new types and brands of tools, and experiment with finishes, epoxies, paints, and glues. It's all about being curious and about learning. One thing I did learn though, I never want to use this router jig again.
I'm finally done with the router.
Now that I've got these holes finally rounded out, the first thing I want to show you is how easy it is to clamp anywhere. Oh, they don't fit. Because of the thickness of the workbench top, when I put this in here, it gets stuck and can't go all the way through. I think I've got a solution though.
It was at this point that I realized all of those dog hole tables like the MFT are made out of just 3/4 inch or 19 millimeter thick MDF, and that doubling up the thickness wouldn't cause any issues with traditional dog hole accessories that have a straight shaft, but would cause interference for these specific types of clamps. Truly a massive oversight on my end. But there is always a pivot that can be made to figure these things out. After being so excited that I finished all of my router work, unfortunately, I had to head back to my router bit collection and pick out this massive 60-degree chamfer. Huh. Now I'm questioning myself which one is right. 60-degree bevel bit, and created a bevel at the bottom of each and every single dog hole. Now, a bit this large takes off a ton of material, so I had to make the full plunge in multiple passes, which was a huge headache. Not only because it was time consuming, but I removed a large part of the polyurethane I had already applied to the bottom of the workbench, so after routing out all of those chamfers, I think, let's not get into that again, I applied some more polyurethane off camera. What happened to this being a quick build?
And now for real this time, I can actually get my clamps anywhere on the bench and easily clamp stuff down wherever I want. But Eric, you don't have a vise. How are you gonna be able to clamp stuff to the side of your workbench and work on the sides? Don't you worry, I've got a plan for that too.
Now, this is one of those things that I never ever thought I would care about. I mean clamping things to the side of my workbench. But as I've learned more about woodworking techniques, it has me curious about the possibilities that having vertical work holding can give me, so this was something that I had thought out before starting this project. It requires no expensive accessories and is significantly better than T-Track. But hang on just a second. First, I popped in an incredibly dull, hear that? An incredibly dull straight bit to create a dado along the edges of the workbench. Nothing exciting, but then I swapped out to this dovetail bit. I know what you're thinking. Eric, you started out the video saying that building a workbench with dovetails is a waste of time. Yes, but hold on just a second. With that dovetail bit in the router, I routed out the exact same path as before. The reason for making a pass with the straight bit first is because it helps lessen the load on the dovetail bit, which is not only safer, but reduces heat on the bit and makes it last much longer. All of my friends and fiance, well I guess now wife, always likes to remind me that I'm cheap, so not having to constantly buy router bits is a nice bonus too. Just be aware that you will have to come up with some sort of sketchy arrangement to route out some of the edges, but
Danger's my middle name.
now I am serious. I am done with the router for this project for good. Seriously. Now, with these dovetail-shaped clamps, I can slide them on the track I just routed into that hard maple for rock-solid vertical work holding, so I can do stuff like hand-plane edges of wood. Pretty neat.
Now yes, I can clamp on the top and I can clamp on the sides, but I know that there's somebody going to be feverishly attacking the comments section telling me that I missed one big issue. Because there are so many holes all over the surface of this workbench, if I have small pieces like screws, they're instantly gonna fall through these holes. But before I get to that one, there's another issue that I need to address first. Now, even with using that super expensive router jig, unfortunately, some of these holes still aren't exactly the right size. So dog hole accessories like a hold down clamp like this don't necessarily fit in all the holes.
No need to fear, there is a simple solution for this, and it's one that I covered in my 10 tools I regret not buying sooner video. It's a dog hole reamer. Chuck it up into any drill, and it's precision ground to be exactly 20 millimeters in diameter, clearing out any bits of sawdust, glue, epoxy, or just flattening bumps and bruises inside of the dog holes. And I know, this build has a lot of repetition in it. But that's why you need some headphones to listen to music, books, or podcasts while you build. I find it relaxing to zone out and do stuff like this after a long, hard day at work. Now, all of my dog hole accessories fit perfectly. But there's more that I didn't show you, but a keen eye may have noticed what's going on here.
So not only does this make sure that all of my accessories fit inside the holes because they're now the exact right size, but it also adds that small chamfer on every single hole. And what that does is allows me to do this.
Remember dropping screws in those holes? Yeah, not anymore. These are dog hole plugs that fit perfectly inside the dog holes and leave a flush surface across the top. You can easily pop them out from the bottom, or because they're magnetic, use any sort of magnet that can quickly and easily lift them up out of the holes.
From hold downs, stops, clamps, all kinds of stuff, there are truly endless accessories that you can both buy and make for dog hole workbenches. And the best part, all you have to do is drill a couple holes into your work surface and you truly have the best and most versatile workbench top on the market. Now I could spend forever going into all of my favorite accessories, but I'll save that for another video. See you on the next one.